a new way this evening. We're glad you're able to join us either in person or online. I'm obviously online myself tonight. I'm down in Texas, but happy to be joining remotely. It's kind of amazing how these technologies make things so much easier than they used to. Before we get started tonight, I just wanted to do a few announcements and let you know the things that we have coming up. First off, next Friday is Connect Night. We're going to be talking about connecting to spirituality after deconstruction. Alton's going to be leading that discussion, so it should be great, and check that out. And then off of our normal Friday schedule, be sure to check out, if you're around or maybe just getting back from a trip, the November 26th, there's going to be a Friendsgiving that we're doing in partnership with Community United Methodist Church. So right there at our normal location, but at 5 p.m. there's going to be a dinner gathering there. So we suggest you check that out. It's posted on our Facebook page. They are doing Eventbrite tickets just to get a sense of numbers. So check that out. And if you're interested, go ahead and grab some tickets for that. Then just what's coming up on our calendar in December, we've got some great things. On the 1st, we've got an LGBTQ plus allyship. Allyship. I don't know where I got allyship. Allyship discussion. Where Dan Hemmer from PFLAG of DuPage is going to come talk to us about where to begin with that. December 8th for Explore, we're going to have Jason talking to us about centering prayer. The 15th, it's Reform Night, and we'll be talking about the conflict in Gaza. And then the 22nd for Connect Night, Victoria is going to talk to us about the true joy of Christmas. So a lot of great stuff coming up. So we hope lots of folks will be able to join us in person or online. And again, if you're interested in the Friendsgiving next Sunday at CUMC, check out the link on our social media. So with all that said, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for tonight. Paula Peters is a journalist, an educator, and an activist. She's a member of the Wampanoag tribe, and she spent most of her life in a tribal homeland of Mashpee, Massachusetts. She's a founder of the Native American creative agency SmokeSygnals, and has written and presented extensively on Native American history, including writings and interviews addressing the arrival of the Mayflower from the Native American perspective and the true story of Thanksgiving. We're very excited to have Paula join us remotely tonight, so please welcome Paula.
Kutabatanamu, Natasawi Sonkwabin, Nusamas Masapiak. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. In my own language, I introduced myself. My traditional name is Sonkwabin, which means cool wind. And I live in Mashpee, Massachusetts. I have pretty much grown up in my ancestral homeland here. So I've always been very familiar with what it's like to be an Indigenous person in my Indigenous homeland. And I've had to kind of grow up a little bit defensive about that because there's just so many stereotypes and misconceptions about Indigenous people in general, but the Wampanoag specifically, and especially when it comes to the Thanksgiving holiday. It's a holiday that conjures up really a great many stereotypes and misconceptions, because it's a holiday that tells the story that really satisfies the casual consumer of history, about friendly Indians helping the Pilgrims to survive, and everybody sits down to a luscious meal, and it lives basically happily ever after. It ignores a lot, and in particular avoids a very critical backstory to the Mayflower, to the Pilgrims, to the establishment of Plymouth Colony. For many people, when they learn about the Mayflower, that's a story that really begins in 1620, and the first Native American they learn about is Squanto, and everybody loves Squanto. He's a character that um, brings with him just all of this, uh, his giving spirit. He comes and he teaches the English people how to hunt and how to fish and how to plant, and no one really questions. Well, wait a second, who is this guy? Where does he come from, speaking perfect English to these settlers? Um, and if that question ever gets asked seriously, the answer to it really is surprising to a lot of people. Um, and it's important in telling the story of the Wampanoag to really go back and tell Squanto's story, and to really bust the myths about Thanksgiving. I mean, first off, Thanksgiving is inspired by an event that did happen back in 1621. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that event. There was an event that occurred after the first harvest that the Pilgrims of Plymouth were able to harvest, and they were celebrating that harvest because they had a successful season. And in celebrating their harvest, they didn't invite the Wampanoag. What happened was the militia of the village, headed by one Miles Standish, decided that they would have a bullish muster, which meant that they were just going to fire off all their guns, because that's what they do when they celebrate. They fire off all their guns. And you have to imagine, at a time in the 17th century when there weren't any guns, something like that happening all of a sudden raised an alarm. It raised a serious alarm among the neighboring Indians, who had just so recently signed a treaty of alliance with these pilgrims. So in response to this, what they presumed to be a threat, the Massasoit of the Wampanoag gathered about 90 of his men, and they went to the village armed. And there's only a paragraph that's ever been written about that occasion, so we don't really know how they were talked out of whatever fierce affront they were making to the Pilgrims. But somehow the Pilgrims were able to convince them that there was no threat, that they were just having a good old time with their guns, and that they should just calm down. And in doing so, they probably made a kind of a backward invitation. Well, why don't you sit down and have something to eat? They ended up joining the Pilgrims for 3 days of feasting, because that's the way Wampanoags are. We don't just sit down and have a little turkey leg. No, they ended up staying for a 3-day feast. And in that one paragraph that is written about this event, we know that much. We also know that they went and killed some deer, and they also brought back some fowl. And we have no idea what kind of fowl, so we don't know whether it was turkey or not. But the poor turkey has suffered miserably as a result of being misidentified as the fowl that was served on Thanksgiving, on that original supposed Thanksgiving day. So those are the myths of Thanksgiving, or the event that inspired the Thanksgiving holiday. And in in exposing those myths and debunking what actually happened there that day, I don't want people to not come together and give thanks. I think that Thanksgiving is one of this nation's most popular holidays, and it's for a reason. Just like your group is going to come together and have a Friendsgiving, which I think is awesome. I saw it on your Facebook page. I want to come, but kind of a long drive for me. But it is a very popular time for families, for friends, for people in coming together. And I think, however that came about, it's a good thing to have a Thanksgiving. But for Indigenous people and for Wampanoag in particular, we had Thanksgivings all the time. We gave thanks for things like a, a successful hunting season, and we'd give thanks for the animals that the Creator had given us. We gave thanks for the first fruit of the season, which for us would be the strawberry, and have a great festival around the strawberry coming as the first fruit of the season. So the idea that there is just this one Thanksgiving day a year is something that is it's different for us. We don't have just this one Thanksgiving day a year. And it also it's the holiday itself. It forgives a lot in the treatment of the Wampanoag and in Indigenous people in general that came after colonization and after our territories, wherever they were invaded by interlopers and intruders. I think where you guys are, it was the Potawatomi, and even before that, a tribe called Illinois, something that became, I guess, Illinois. And they're people that were displaced and colonized, and colonization was not a good thing. And for the Wampanoag, it begins far and away well before Thanksgiving in 1621, and well before the Mayflower arrived in 1620. But that seems to be the date that everyone arrives at when they start to talk about our history. And it's important to really dial that back a bit, especially when we talk about, I introduced the idea of Squanto, and Squanto being able to speak English, and how miraculous was that? And as he became such a great interpreter for the Pilgrims that William Bradford actually called Squanto their special instrument of God, because he was able to do so much for them. But let's get back to answering that question. How did Squanto actually learn how to speak English? Well, we have to go back quite a few years, and prior to the Mayflower arriving and bringing the Pilgrims who actually settled in Plymouth, there'd actually been quite a few encounters among the coastal tribes of New England with explorers and fishermen and traders who were coming to the region. Some were just coming to explore the area to see if there was, someplace that they'd like to move into. Would they like to establish settlements in the region? And one of those was John Smith, who actually wrote extensively about his discoveries in the New World. And he, in 1614, had been making his rounds around New England. John Smith also is the famed John Smith of Jamestown, who had, down in Virginia, he had made some explorations there and established a settlement there in 1607. In any case, he was exploring in the regions of coastal New England, and in particular, Plymouth, the area that we now know as Plymouth and Cape Cod. And he had another ship that was following behind him that was part of his fleet. And that ship was captained by a gentleman named Thomas Hunt. And Captain Hunt was told by Captain Smith to do some final trading in the area of Cape Cod and Plymouth and get some furs or some fish and come home. Well, Thomas Hunt, when he arrived in the port of Patuxent, which ultimately ended up becoming Plymouth, met with some of the native men there and somehow was able to convince them to come aboard his boat and do trade with him there. Only he did not trade with them. What he did was he somehow secured them below decks and kidnapped them. And he kidnapped 20 men from Patuxent and then went further into Cape Cod to a village called Nauset and took 7 more men. These men were taken and sold into slavery in Malaga in Spain. And some of them were rescued by some religious friars who were in the region and jumped in to save them. It's not clear whether Squanto was actually one of the ones who was rescued or whether he was one of the ones who was sold. But he ended up living with a gentleman, John Slaney, in England. And he lived with that man for 6 years, all the while trying to find his way home again. However, while he's away, after this horrible incident of having 20 men stolen from their village in this village of Patuxent, if you can imagine what that was like. I mean, these are husbands and fathers and sons, and they're also providers for this village. The village probably had about 2,000 people living there. So to lose 20 men out of 2,000 was a very, very significant, had a significant impact on people emotionally and, just on being able to sustain themselves. So that was devastating for the village for sure. But then just a few years later, around about 1616, the villagers there and in villages throughout the region had been struck by a devastating plague. And this was something that was introduced to the region by these, could have been fishermen, could have been traders, who were able to bring over this disease. And because they had such a strong constitution to it and immunities to it, they would not be sickened to their death themselves, but were able to bring over such a disease and introduce it in a way that it was actually described as a virgin soil epidemic, because none of the people here had any immunity to communicable disease. And that's what was introduced to them. And so they began to suffer and die from it at an alarming rate. Tens of thousands of indigenous people from the coast of Maine to the very tip of Cape Cod were wiped out. And the village of Patuxent, where Squanto had been taken from, was completely wiped out. So there was that devastation. And in 1619, by the time Squanto was finally able to convince his captors that he needed to come home and he was to come, he'd convinced them that he would come back and serve as a guide, which was how he was able to get back. And by the time he is able to come back, he is returning to the village of Patuxent to find all are dead or gone. So that must have been an absolutely devastating reality for Squanto. He came back with an explorer, a gentleman named Dermer, and Dermer wrote just one line about Squanto coming back and saying that he brought his savage to return to his home only to find all were dead. But we can just imagine what he must have felt to have been all those years to have been taken away, and all those years been struggling to get back to that place, only to come back and find all was lost. And that would have been bad enough to come back and find that all of his family was gone. But he also came back and he was kind of like kind of describe it like this. You know, I don't know if you were ever told this, but I was always told as a child that if you found a bird that had fallen from the nest, that you wouldn't want to pick it up, because if it was touched by human hands, the mother would reject it. I kind of describe Squanto in those same terms. He was touched by the English and then rejected by his own surviving people, because he came back with Dermer, who was associated with one of the merchants in England, who was someone who was kidnapping indigenous people, and bringing them to England. And this was known about this man who came and brought Squanto back again. So his story is really a really tragic story. And all of that is just erased when you learn the story of Thanksgiving. You think about, well, you know, here was this friendly Indian guy who stepped into the circle and said, "Welcome, Englishmen," in their own language. And he made everything right for them, taught them everything that they needed to know. These are stories that they don't get told, they don't get taught to, in general, to students, because the history just doesn't embrace that story. And it's only more recently that scholars are embracing that story and bringing it out and telling it in a more inclusive way. Sorry about that. So, I mean, that's the backstory that I generally like to bring to you, to teach people about, when they want to know the truth about Thanksgiving and the truth about what actually occurred here. But I really would like to open it up now to speak directly to you and answer questions that you might have about this piece of history, and maybe I can talk to you all a little bit about, you know, the history in your region with your indigenous people. I mean, I have questions about what it's like where you live. I mean, are there Potawatomi left in Naperville? Is there any indigenous community there that you relate to? And, you know, I'd just be curious to know.
Brian, did you want to say any words before we shut down the stream and open up for discussion?
I'm muted because it wouldn't be a live stream without somebody being muted. So no, yeah, thank you, Paula, for that backstory, and I'm excited to get into
Sure.
discussion. I guess before we drop, I know there's one of our folks who's watching the stream who's posed a question. So let me go ahead and ask you this question before we drop the stream. The question is, what is the best way to connect and be an ally for for Native groups?
Well, I think just recognizing that we are still here, and that's one of the best things that you can do, is acknowledge your Indigenous neighbors and friends. Um, and it's difficult for me to say, what it would be like in Illinois, as I'm not that familiar with the area, but I know that there must be tribal communities there, and just acknowledging and being respectful of those communities is important.
Great. Well, thank you. So yeah, I think, Kat, if we want to, we can close out the stream. Thanks for everyone who joined us online, and then we can have a bit more discussion with the folks who were there.
Sure, great.